Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, coming at you this week with your Week 4 waiver wire ads and your Week 4 trade targets. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the Week 4 waiver wire ads of the week. We have two of them this week. Obviously, Jauan Jennings, right, goes off in this game. 3 touchdowns, 175 yards, 11 catches on 12 targets. It's hard to deny that you have to pick him up, right? I mean, he's only 44% rostered. As long as Debo and Kittle are out, he's going to be a very, very strong part of this offense. Now, is he going to do this ever again in his whole career? Probably not. Is he going to be able to be productive? Will he see a lot of targets? Yes. So I do think moving forward, we've seen his upside, so we do know that he should be a top 20 wide receiver as long as Debo and Kittle are out. Now, as these guys get added back into the offense, I do think that there's a chance that his role diminishes to a point where you won't be able to start him. So because of that, I wouldn't throw a huge bid here. I do think, you do want to try and get him, but, maybe 10%, maybe 12%, something like that. If you didn't already pick him up, I know a lot of leagues last week, did pick him up. He was on our video last week for one of the waiver wire targets. So, there is a situation in which he was owned in a lot of leagues, a lot of competitive leagues. And so, but just putting him here, 44% rostered, make sure that you go and get Jauan Jennings if he's available in your league. And similarly, running back that's the ad of the week is Bucky Irving here. They came out after the game, said he's worked his way into more of a role. He did not play very many snaps. So if you go and look at the snap share, Rachaad White still dominated the snaps. But I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward because Bucky Irving had 9 carries for 70 yards, had work in the passing game. White had much more work in the passing game, many more routes as well. But I think that overall that could be changing. I'm very excited about Bucky Irving because he is a very talented player, and I do think that there's a chance that he gets involved here in this offense in a way that can make him relevant, make him a bye week fill-in, and can possibly make him more valuable even than Rachaad White. So definitely go get Bucky Irving. Again, this guy is somebody that does have the long-term value, right? So Jauan Jennings maybe has the startable upside right now, but Bucky Irving is somebody that has maybe a little bit long-term upside here. But since he's not like an imminent starter, I don't think there's going to be a huge rush to the waiver wire to get him. I think that he's going to get added in a lot of places because of all the news around him, because of how productive he's been. But again, like a 12 to 15% bid here in FAAB, maybe. And, especially if he's going to be like your 5th or your 6th running back, you might want to consider reducing that even lower. It's not necessarily somebody that you're going to be completely committed to if you already are stacked at running back. So the rest of the week 4 waiver wire ads at quarterback, obviously we're for SuperFlex audience, right? So we're not talking about Sam Darnold or Derek Carr, guys that are still down in like the 20% ownership. Jameis Winston, I think, is somebody that if you're struggling at quarterback, if you have Gardner Minshew on your team, if you have Will Levis had a pretty good game, actually. Bo Nix had a pretty good game. But like, if you're struggling at quarterback, you feel like you need a guy, go and get Winston, because I do think that Deshaun Watson is going to get benched sooner than later. He just looks terrible. He got sacked 8 times, and they lost this game to the Giants. There's no reason they should have lost this game other than the fact that Watson could not get it together to get the ball out of his hands and keep the offense on schedule. So they scored on the very first possession, and then they scored late in the fourth quarter. It was just not good at all. They could not move the ball consistently with any sort of effectiveness. And I just don't. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for the Browns to bench Watson because of that contract. But I do think that Winston could help give this offense a spark. The second quarterback, this guy shows up, same as last week, Tyler Huntley. Skylar Thompson got hurt in the game, and Tim Boyle is not the answer here. Tyler Huntley cannot get up to speed fast enough. He is going to be the starter, in my opinion, and he should be the starter this week. I don't know if he's struggling to get the offense down, right? I know McDaniels runs a pretty complicated system, but he should be in there as soon as possible. So if you're struggling, he does have some rushing upside here, and he will get added once he is named the starter. Moving over to running backs, we got 4 names here. Chuba Hubbard, I cheated a little bit on this one. He's 61% rostered, but after his explosion this week, 21 carries, over 100 yards, 5 catches, and a receiving touchdown, this is somebody that you want back on your team, okay? He's going to be in the mix for a top 20 running back next week. After that, it's going to be a little bit hit or miss depending on Jonathan Brooks and if he comes back in week 5 and how quickly he's able to get assimilated into the offense. But for this week, if you're looking for a starter, Chuba Hubbard is your guy. You want to make sure you go get him. Again, since there's not a lot of long-term value, I would not spend more than 5% of my FAAB here. I would probably roll with people on my roster rather than blow a bunch of FAAB on trying to get a 1-week starter. And going on to that, right, I would rather have Rico Dowdle on my roster anyways. So I put him in trade targets last week, but his roster percentage is actually below 50%. So I did move him over to the waiver wire section. He saw a massive increase in snaps this week. He played the dominant role on the offense. Zeke played less than half the number of snaps Dowdle did. Dowdle was involved in the passing game. On third downs, they did have another running back come in and play on third down. So that was a little bit frustrating because it would be nice to see Dowdle take that role, especially, right? I'd rather give up some early down work and make sure you're playing on third downs. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case this week. But Dowdle did play a ton. So make sure you go get him on your team if you can, if he's not rostered in your leagues. These last two guys, they aren't priority ads. These are $0 bids if you have a spot, basically. But Roschon Johnson, who didn't play at all in the first 2 weeks, right? We recommended Khalil Herbert and beat the waiver wire. And then Roschon Johnson did not play in week 1 or 2. So we did not think he was going to be in the mix. He ended up being the one that saw the majority of the snaps behind DeAndre Swift. So Swift did still dominate snaps here, played 48 to Roschon's 32. But I do think if you're searching for a possible starting running back here, Roschon Johnson is the one you want to go after. Khalil Herbert did run at the goal line, so that's going to be really frustrating if his only snaps, if he's going to get 10 snaps a game, and they're all going to come inside the 5-yard line or on 3rd and short, 4th and short. That's going to be very frustrating for these running backs because they're just not going to score very many touchdowns if they're not getting it in close. So hopefully Roschon can get that role, but he did see quite a bit of work in the passing game, so I do think that he has the potential here to take over from Swift, even though that is not happening yet. The last guy here, Emanuel Wilson, had to add him here because he is such a valuable handcuff at this point, but still played quite a bit behind Josh Jacobs. He was productive in the passing game. He had a 30-yard receiving touchdown. He did break off a couple runs as well, so looked good this week. So if you do have Jacobs, maybe consider adding him as one of these high-value handcuffs with Lloyd still on IR. So we'll see once Lloyd comes off IR if he has any sort of role. But until then, this is the guy, if you have Jacobs, that you want to get as a handcuff. At wide receiver, same name as last week. Going to put him back up at the top here. Again, not a lot of options at wide receiver. It was pretty thin this week. So Darnell Mooney coming in at 43% rostered. He had 8 targets again, 8 catches, 63 yards. This is somebody that you want to get on your team. Okay, he is definitely part of this Falcons offense in a big way. So you do want to try and get him onto the end of your bench if you can. If anything, would happen to Drake London, this would be somebody that could step in, and I do think would be even that much more productive on more volume. These last 2 names, Tre Tucker, I'm not entirely sure that you want to add him. $0 bid, end of your bench, but he had a huge game. I mean, he got 9 targets. He had 95 yards and a touchdown. He was very good. I will say his touchdown came from O'Connell towards the end of the game, but I did not even really know who this was. And then he led the Raiders in receiving this week. So wanted to note him here, especially if you play in deep leagues and you're listening to this, 3% rostered, right? You play in a 12-team, 8-bench dynasty league type of setup. Maybe take a look at him. He's only 23 years old. He played on a ton of snaps. He was the clear number 3 wide receiver. He looked fast. He looked good. So, in that sort of format, take a look at Tre Tucker, see if you can get him on your bench. And lastly here, Jalen Nailor. Have to put him on here. Jordan Addison is going to be out, for at least next week again. And Nailor has a very good connection with Darnold. And so as the number 2 kind of in the passing, maybe number 3 behind Aaron Jones, but as the number 2 wide receiver here, he has been very productive, touchdowns every week. And he actually had a touchdown called back on penalty in this game too. So he could have had an even bigger game here. He's looked good. This also gives very strong confidence for Jordan Addison, somebody that you're going to want to try and get if you can via trade. So definitely like Nailor as long as Addison is out. At tight end, you have Cole Kmet. He dropped down below 50% to 47%. Does feel like a lot of his production was tied to Keenan Allen being out over the last 2 weeks. His snap percentages over Gerald Everett have increased drastically, right? That was our main comment on Cole Kmet is that their snap share in the preseason and in week 1 was split almost evenly, and then Keenan Allen was out and Cole Kmet took on a much bigger role. So you see he's tight end 3 here. He had a massive game, right? 10 catches, 97 yards and a touchdown. With how bad tight end is going to be, that's going to elevate you a ton. So, but if you can get Kmet, as long as Keenan Allen is out, which he hasn't really practiced much, so he could be out again this week, go ahead and look for Cole Kmet on your waiver wires. And then a guy that should be available pretty much across the board for a lot of our viewers here is Noah Fant. He had a very productive game, 6 targets, 6 catches, 60 yards straight across the board. So if you're struggling, you still have Evan Engram out, something like that, Noah Fant is somebody that you can look to add to the end of your bench and possibly play if your tight end is out. Again, $0 bids. I would say $0 bid on Kmet and $0 bid on Fant. I don't think Kmet is long for this kind of production. Fant obviously is still competing with the 3 wide receivers in Seattle as well. So there's some value here for a week or two. But again, don't bid anything crazy on these guys. $0, maybe $1 bids if you are really stuck at tight end. Moving on to the trade targets here. So we've got quite a few players here. I tried to give you guys some new players to look at here, but there are a couple crossovers. So I did want to kind of highlight players we've talked about in the past and why they still show up on here. So some of the values have changed a little bit, and that's why I'm including them. So we'll start off with one of those guys, Patrick Mahomes here. With Mahomes, we told you that he was going to get off to a slow start here, right? I mean, he did have a couple tough matchups, but even this week, he only scored 16 points. He's going to be down outside of the top 10 quarterbacks through the first 3 weeks. So if somebody in your SuperFlex leagues drafted, say, a Derek Carr or a Sam Darnold or a Baker Mayfield as their third option, and they're feeling very confident about their quarterback situation, maybe they have a fourth one, like a Bo Nix or I don't know exactly who it would be, but if they have a fourth quarterback, or even if you have a bench quarterback that you could trade to them, maybe like a Daniel Jones who's been playing really well, and you can try and take advantage of the fact that the Mahomes owner is deep at quarterback, this is the time to go get him here, okay? He's doing poorly. The Patrick Mahomes owner is probably starting to get a little impatient, and if they aren't particularly good, they might trade him for somebody that is good, a starter, right, at a different position. Brock Bowers maybe could be included in the deal, or, you could get an RB2, like, for example, Travis Etienne here, right? I mean, anybody out of your starting lineup that isn't entirely critical to your team, or somebody that you can kind of fill in from your bench. Say you have a Deontay Johnson on your bench and you can trade Mike Evans to get him, right? Another guy that shows up here as the focal point of the deal. Obviously, you're going to have to give up more than those players to go get Mahomes, but just saying, this is something you want to check back in on, especially if you listened to us at the beginning of the year and checked in on him early. Check in on him again, see if he's available. Second quarterback here is Jared Goff. I really do think that Goff is going to be great this year. Even still, he has been not good, right? He threw 55 passes 2 weeks ago, threw 300 yards, didn't score. But I do think Goff will get it going here, right? He has so many weapons. And I think that overall, after throwing only 23 passes this week, right, he was efficient, but just didn't score that many points. And so I'm guaranteeing whoever has Goff is way down on him. Maybe they have somebody else on their bench, again, that can fill in, or you can convince them of lower end quarterback like a Sam Darnold and go up and get Goff. I think that is something that you could be looking into doing here at this point. At running back, got 3 names here. So Travis Etienne, this is a new one, right? He just hasn't been playing that well, and Trevor Lawrence has looked awful. This offense has done poorly overall, and he was drafted very highly, right, in the top 10 running backs, and is currently outside the top 25. He did have an okay game here on Monday night, but overall didn't score, didn't do anything crazy. And so I think you could possibly get him on the cheap here. And so I'm not suggesting you give up a big time player, but if you could go and get Etienne for like a bench running back and a flex possible starter at receiver, say, for example, and kind of make a move up for Etienne, I think that's something that you should explore anyways, and try to send a very low ball trade offer here, because he's been so bad. So there's a chance that whoever owns Etienne, for how high they had to draft him, is 0-3 or 1-2 and in need of help in a big way. So go check in on Etienne, see if you can get him on the cheap. Tony Pollard, after 2 weeks, looked like he was going to be phenomenal. It's going to be really hard to get him in a trade like this. So trying to take advantage of this third week being so poor. Tajay Spears outplayed him this week, right? And he only got 6 carries, only a couple targets. So they were just getting beat so badly by Green Bay that it was just hard for them to get anything going at all. Levis just was throwing, racked up the yardage and the passing yardage. And Pollard just wasn't really part of the game plan after they got down big. So this is your chance to go get him. If you can, again, buy him at his draft price, not at what he looked like he was going to be over the first 2 weeks, that's something that you can try or that you should be able to do here, or should try to do anyways. If the Pollard owner kind of sees through that and wants to keep him, then fine. But throw a trade offer out for Pollard here. One of the guys I mentioned at the top that we've been kind of talking about and that his situation has changed is Rachaad White. So I had been saying go and get him, right, as kind of a starter. And if you did get him, hopefully you didn't overpay too much to acquire him, because at this point with Bucky Irving, like we talked about in the waiver ads, it seems that White is in a situation where he could be possibly losing touches, and he's been so inefficient on the ground that it's almost been hard to play him, right? I mean, it's not like last year. Last year, at least he was getting 4 yards a carry or something. He's down at 2.2 yards per carry. They're starting to lose faith in him on the ground a little bit. He did have pretty good receiving game work in week 1, and then he got a lot of targets, just not a lot of yardage this past week. I would still be trying to acquire White, and I would be trying to acquire him for a bench player, right? This isn't somebody that you're even necessarily going to be comfortable starting until you see something better. But if you can get him for a bench guy, this is somebody that was still drafted very highly. He was running back 5 on the season last year. He could still easily turn this around. He was not good through 5 weeks last year and then turned it on and was just awesome for the second, from week 5 to week 17. So the offense still looks very good. Baker still looks solid. And so if you can go out and get him, he should still remain the starter. And he dominated snaps. It wasn't like Bucky Irving played a ton of snaps. Bucky Irving's production and box score jumps off the page, but he still dominated snaps. So I think what they're talking about there is that Bucky's going to get a chance to play on more snaps, right? And that's not necessarily going to translate to work away from White in the box score. So go out and try and get White on the very, very cheap with all of this news and negativity surrounding him. I think I'm going to be trying to do it. I was talking about with one of the owners in my league that has White, and so I'm going to maybe follow up this week and try and get him even cheaper than I would have last week. Jumping over the receivers here, we got 3 receivers, obviously going from the most attainable to the least attainable, starting with Jayden Reed. So with Reed, his production is going to spike once Jordan Love is back, and his value is going to spike once Jordan Love is back, right? So he's had 2 down weeks. He's still wide receiver 8 on the season because of his incredible week 1. And if anybody's getting worried or anybody sees weekly rankings and sees him down at 37 type of thing, right, and is getting a little impatient or hasn't been able to play him, so he's been just sitting kind of on the end of their bench, and over the last couple of weeks, he's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle, try to get Reed on the cheap here, because I do think he's one of the most explosive players in the league. He is so good on a per target basis and so good on a per route basis that as one of the most explosive players in the league, he is bound to have success once Love is back. They clearly have a connection, and I do think that this is somebody that you could start in your third wide receiver spot or in your flex spot for the rest of the year, assuming health for Jordan Love. Go try and get Jayden Reed. Mike Evans, this is obviously going to be a little bit tougher of a lift, but after a great week 1, he was terrible in week 2 and terrible in week 3. I think that has more to do with the matchups and the fact that in week 3, they were just getting beat by the Broncos. Their defense couldn't stop the Broncos offense, which was definitely a shock, but he himself was going up against Surtain. So we were kind of expecting a bad week here from Evans. If the owners panicked at all, or if you're in a 2 wide receiver flex league, there's a chance that Evans was benched this week anyways, and that owner has pretty good wide receiver depth, so maybe you can offer them a running back in return for Mike Evans. And I think that over the second half or over the rest of the year, he should be much more productive. So check in and see if you can get Evans. The last guy here, and I know you guys are gonna be like, yeah, right, can't get Tyreek Hill, but without Tua, he is not going to be nearly as valuable. He only had 4 catches for 30 yards with Skylar Thompson and Tim Boyle. I know I've been touting Huntley is the quarterback, but these guys at quarterback are so bad. I mean, the fact that they can't get the ball to Tyreek Hill is kind of says it all, I think. So if someone in your league is really down on Hill, or, you can kind of convince them, look, this is trending down. Tua has a head injury. Like, maybe he's back after 4 weeks, but by that point you might be out of it, or it doesn't necessarily even mean he's going to be back that early. This is somebody that I would, again, try to get low. Like, if you can low ball it, right? Amari Cooper just had an awesome game, right? Somebody down in the 20 range, right? Roma Dunze just had a great game. Not that you can get him for a Dunze, but maybe somebody's excited about the fact that a rookie breakout kind of just happened this week. And you can include him in the deal. DJ Moore, any of these guys really that show up in that 15 to 25 range. If you can kind of base the deal on that and include another bench player, include a running back with it, like a Zach Moss maybe, who's just had a very good game. You end up giving up DJ Moore and Zach Moss for Tyreek. That's the kind of deal I'd be looking to offer. And maybe the Tyreek Hill owner scoffs at it and really downplays it and gets upset or whatever. But maybe they don't. And maybe they're worried. And especially if they're a Dolphins fan, they're probably worried. So check in on Tyreek. And again, if they counter or try, you have a better player and they try and go up for it, don't scoff at that either, right? If they go up and try and say, hey, I'll do it for Chris Godwin, right? And the DJ Moore, right? Godwin and Moore, and then I'll do it, right? And then you end up in a situation where you get a very early first-round pick for players that you did not pick that high, and I think that's worth looking into. At the tight end position, we have a couple hurt tight ends here. Tight end has been so terrible. It's been crazy to actually think about how bad all of these tight ends are playing, and so these guys are basically beacons of hope once they're healthy and back on the field. So starting with TJ Hockenson, the offense, I think it explains itself for Minnesota. They look very good overall. I do think that they're going to continue to look good. Sam Darnold is awesome. And, Mund had a decent number of targets, but obviously Hawkinson's going to demand a lot more targets than Mund. And I do think that he can be productive in this offense that has looked very good so far. 8 touchdowns passing already through 3 weeks. And I think Hockenson could get on the fun once he's healthy. David Njoku, another guy. Atkins had a good game and a lot of targets this week. So if he's able to get involved like that, David Njoku should be able to just kind of step into that role. And if he's going to get 7-8 targets a game, I do think that he has a lot of upside. He had 4 for 44 in week 1 before he went out. And I do think that overall he should be productive once he's back on the field. All right. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. And we'll see you guys in the next one.